Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Paradigm Live. I wanted to do something a little bit different today. There was an article, actually, a handful of articles that I've been researching over the past few months, and I wanted to share one of those articles with you. And hopefully, I'm thinking this is going to be a new trend for me to be sharing the articles that I research when I find a really good one. This is actually a little bit of an older article. It's from January 2017, authored by Joel Bauman, but is really, really provocative, really thought provoking, and actually helped me um, in a train of thought to look a little bit more into gold and silver. So, things that I've been researching for quite some time for the markets, for investments, and so on. It actually led me to find a really interesting book as well, which I'll talk about maybe a little bit later. But I want to jump into this article here. And as I mentioned in the title, the name of the article is "What Does the Bible Say About Gold and Silver?" So I had been, as I mentioned, doing my own research, looking into this for several months, and I know I had wanted to do this on my own and look up what scriptures mention gold and silver and how it's used in the Bible, how those two things, gold and silver, are used in the Bible. But I think this is a really interesting article. It actually really made me think and helped me to kind of focus a little bit of my study as to the historical importance of gold and silver. So let me get into this article. It starts out here. This article was submitted by Joel Bauman, Schiff Gold Precious Metals Specialist. Any views expressed are his own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Peter Schiff or Schiff Gold. From the gold and silver in Solomon's temple to heaven's streets of pure gold, there are more than 700 references to these two precious metals in the Bible. As relevant and desired as gold and silver are today throughout most cultures, they have a much older and timeless context within the Bible. When examining scripture, a reader can draw three critical characteristics about gold and silver: their divine origin, intrinsic value, and monetary quality. Divine origin. The first reference to gold is during creation of the world in the second chapter of Genesis. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads. The name of the first is Pishon. That is it which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Genesis 2, verses 10 through 12. So let me pause right here, and I actually wanted to comment on this. So this is where it led me to do a little bit more research and digging into what does it really mean here when it says that the gold of that land is good. So that actually led me to find a book, a really interesting book called God's Money by Justin Roșora. He is a Romanian who was born in communist Romania, and he actually did an extensive biblical study on gold and silver, and he actually is working on a 5-volume set. And I've gotten the first book. I'm hoping to start reading it tonight, called God's Money, and it's a study of gold and silver in the Bible. That first book, or that first volume, goes through the scriptures that talk about gold and silver from Genesis through the book of Judges. So very extensive, very interesting, and I think very relevant to investing in gold and silver from a historical basis, but especially from a biblical basis, which is something that I aim to reinforce and to talk about quite extensively with my business that I've recently started, which is Paradigm Bible Ministries. So that's something that I'll be sharing a lot more about later in future videos, Lord willing. But as I mentioned, this this gentleman, Justin Roshora, he did a word study in Hebrew on what does it mean that the gold of that land is good. The word good in Hebrew is tov, tov. And that word, as he studied it out, doesn't just mean good as opposed to bad per se, but what it means when it says the gold of that land is good, as the other parts of creation that God saw that they were good, this one specifically, it identifies that God is explaining to us that the gold has a purpose. Good means to have a purpose. That's the translational meaning or the significance of it. And so when it says that the gold of that land is good, it means that it has a purpose. Now, let's continue. It says that the Bible says God created the world and the elements within it. Gold is depicted as an asset of value. There's another verse which says, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, saith the Lord of hosts. Haggai 2:8. So we see here as well, God really is the owner of all the resources. Whether, any human person decides, well, I have this resource, or I have this, or I have that. Ultimately, God is the one who owns it all. He's the creator, so it all belongs to him. Okay. Gold and silver are products of God. They are not a creation of man. God designed them to be intrinsically valuable and beautiful, for gold does not tarnish nor corrode. It can be hammered so thin that a single ounce can spread over a 100 square foot area. Silver is the best conductor of heat and electricity. It reflects light better than any other metal, and when fully refined, it looks like a mirror. Intrinsic value. These unique properties of gold and silver have served as benchmarks of value throughout Scripture. One notable reference is a metaphor used by the Apostle Paul. Now, if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest. For the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. And the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. 1 Corinthians 3:12-13. In this passage, Paul highlights gold and silver's ability to withstand fire. Precious metals are not only unharmed when tried by fire, but they become refined and pure. This verse is a powerful comparison between a man's good work on the foundation of Christ and the qualities of gold and silver. Monetary quality. In ancient times, it will be strange to refer to money as something outside of gold and silver. In the Bible, gold and silver are synonymous with money. In Hebrew, there was no word for money. Every biblical passage that refers to money is a unit of weight in gold, silver, or another metal. Silver was used for day-to-day purchases, and gold was viewed as approximately 20-fold the value of silver. It is worth noting, when the United States operated on the gold standard, an ounce of silver was worth about $1, and an ounce of gold was worth approximately $20. So I want to make a correction here. The actual fact is that an ounce of silver historically, there were a lot of laws and legislations passed, and especially as far back, I think it was the 17 and then the 1800s. But essentially, the ideal price for 1 ounce of silver was actually $1.2929. Now the silver dollar, which was a $1 face value, that actually had only a little bit over 3/4 of an ounce of silver. So this reference that I mentioned here, it's a little bit off. The author is describing $1, but the face value of a silver dollar was backed by about 3/4 of an ounce of silver. So to have 1 full ounce of silver, that actually would bring the ratio compared 1 ounce of silver to 1 ounce of gold, that would actually bring the ratio a little bit lower, down to about 16 to 1. Now, in today's economy, in today's markets, the current ratio of prices of gold to silver, silver today is about $24 an ounce, and gold is $1,685 per ounce. And that ratio comes to about 70 to 1. So it would take 70 ounces of silver to trade for 1 ounce of gold today. But in Bible times, it was somewhere between 16 to 20. And even historically, at the founding of the United States, the Treasury, they when they minted coins for circulation, coins were actually to be made out of gold and silver. Those were legal tender. That was money. Was either gold or silver coin. And the ratio was approximately 16 to 1 that they could be traded. Okay, let's continue. Gold and silver were used as money not only in Jewish culture, but throughout all cultures. Regardless of man's location on earth, gold and silver are both accessible and valued as wealth. A believer could easily make the conclusion that God placed gold and silver strategically throughout the world. By doing this, all nations throughout history have enjoyed the utility of gold and silver as money. In the last century, the world has removed gold and silver from its monetary role. By ignoring the use of gold and silver as money, central banks have created large economic imbalances. Every day, currencies fluctuate in value because of manipulative monetary policies. When central banks expand their balance sheets, artificial wealth is created. Monetary inflation and low interest rates enrich the wealthy, while the poor are robbed of their labor and savings. So that's really important if you think about it today, and there's some scriptures to expound on this concept. But one of the big reasons that I wanted to bring these important facts to people's attention is the big concerns today with the fiscal stimulus, free money, stimulus checks, infrastructure plan, etc. All the trillions of dollars that are being printed or created, and that have been for several years, not just with our current President Biden, but I think the first time this actually happened, at least since I was alive, was President Obama. He was the first president that I know of, or during my lifetime, that gave out quote unquote free stimulus checks, as in money created by the government specifically to help stimulate the economy, just giving out free checks, free money during the 2008-2009 housing crisis or global financial crisis. And then, of course, during COVID, we had emergency spending, emergency plans, stimulus, etc. by President Trump. And now, of course, with President Biden. So 3 presidents in a row are giving out free money, just printing it, having the Federal Reserve create money, or print currency rather, and giving it out to help stimulate the economy, help those that are in need, etc. And it's not truly a creation of money. It's really a creation of currency, but it has some very, very, very detrimental effects in the long run that I think most people don't understand, and that's why I want to bring this to people's attention. As I mentioned, monetary inflation, meaning printing more currency, creating more currency, is inflation. You're inflating the money supply. So monetary inflation and low interest rates enrich the wealthy, while the poor are robbed of their labor and savings. What ends up happening is when they create more currency or print more money, yes, it's a temporary short-term increase in money supply, or the money that people have in their pockets. But in the long run, it ends up inflating prices as well. So the costs of goods and services will go up because you've inflated the money supply and there's only a fixed amount of goods and services available. So therefore, the cost of purchasing those goods and services has to increase. And it's inevitable. Okay, now what does the Bible say about this? The Bible says God hates deceit and manipulation. God is the author of balance and justice. A false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Proverbs 11:1. A just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work. Proverbs 16:11. God created gold and silver as the backbone of economic growth. Precious metals act as a balance and a perfect unit of measure. When God created the world, he set fixed quantities for each metal, so we do not experience runaway inflation or deflation. In summary, God is the creator of gold and silver. They are valuable and they serve as money. This last viewpoint has been forgotten. The gold standard was abolished in 1933, and buying gold was unlawful in the United States from 1933 to 1975. So it's something that I think an important comment here is what ended up happening is 1933 to 1975. So that's 42 years. For 42 years, which by some evaluations, a generation is approximately 40 years. Now there's other numbers that can be used, but in certain measurements, 40 years is a good standard for a generation. So for approximately one generation, for 42 years, it was illegal or unlawful for people to actually purchase or own physical gold. This was done for a lot of reasons, but essentially what ended up happening is in 1933, there was an executive order issued during the Great Depression by then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who made it unlawful to own more than a very small amount of gold unless it was in things like jewelry or certain collectible coins and such. Anyways, doing this, basically they told people at the time that they could turn in their gold and be redeemed for $20.67. That gold could be redeemed for that much money, $20.67. Within a few months in 1934, the government revalued all of the gold that it had collected to a dollar amount of $35 per ounce. So essentially what this did is all of the dollars that people had been given in exchange for their gold were immediately devalued by 40%. Why? Because people recognized the value of gold on the market throughout the world, and with the United States leading this effort, it allowed people to acknowledge that the only thing that could really happen is that since people had all this paper money and the government was also going to issue additional currency in order to offset the new valuation of all the gold that they held, this was going to inflate the money supply and thereby devalue the currency that was in existence or being held by the United States citizens. So, as a consequence of this monetary inflation is that you had the prices of goods and services, just about everything, increasing in a very short amount of time because they had to reflect not just the rise in amount of currency available for the limited amount of goods and services, but also to better reflect the limited supply of gold. If gold was instantly increased in price from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, everything else in the economy, especially all sorts of commodities, essential things like like cattle, meat, a big one is like corn, soybeans, flour, barley, grain, etc. And even things like steel, lumber, wool, like I said, all kinds of commodities. Those things had to be immediately changed, or very quickly at least changed in their prices, in order to reflect that there was an increase of dollars that were going to be circulating. Now, the reason that this is so important is that's what's happening today, except there are a lot of different controls that are being manipulated in order to make it less noticeable. People also these days the estimate is that there's only about 2% of the current United States citizens, only about 2% estimate, that invest in physical gold and silver out of everyone that is in the United States. And that's pretty crazy compared to a lot of other countries in the world where they hold tons and tons and tons of gold, particularly India and China. Those two are the biggest consumers of physical gold in the general population. People will literally get their checks, especially in India. They'll get their checks and they will immediately go and buy some gold. It's just a different world that we live in today. But essentially, as I mentioned, the whole premise of this article is what does the Bible say about gold and silver? And my concluding thoughts are that I want people to be aware that God is the one who established gold and silver to be used as money. That was evidenced all the way back by Abraham. Abraham, actually, also in the book of Genesis, was described financially as being rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. And this is also something that I've found in the book that I just got, called God's Money by Justin Rochora. He explains that this is an economic verse. It has a lot of economic undertones. Basically, Abraham is described as being rich in cattle, silver, and gold, meaning this: the cattle was his livelihood. That was what he had in order to to be wealthy. That was his productivity. The thing that he produced or developed was he herded cattle, and he sold the cattle, traded the cattle, etc. But it wasn't so easy to just trade a cow or a steer or whatever for everything he needed. That wasn't really convenient, because then he would just be buying a bunch of other perishable goods. And so there had to be something else he could use. So his cattle was his productivity. That was his livelihood. Then silver. Silver this is the first time that silver was mentioned in the Bible. And so it indicates that silver was his medium of exchange, something that in little bars or coins or pieces by weight that he could trade for other goods and services. It was something that people could hold that was non-perishable. So just in case your neighbor produced, let's say they produced chicken eggs, and you wanted to buy the chicken eggs, and that person didn't need any beef. They already had enough, or they had their own cattle. So you couldn't convince them to take any more cattle or any more beef from you. So you had to have a medium of exchange that was non-perishable, so that they could store or keep that method of trade or that medium of exchange for themselves to then purchase other goods and services later on. That's why they had to have something that was a physical asset with intrinsic value, such as silver. So it was valuable, but not too expensive. So it was a simple and convenient way to trade. And then finally, gold. Gold is described as being his accumulation of wealth. Why? Because it was approximately 20 times more valuable, and therefore the same weight of gold had that extra value. It was more compact. So if he needed to hold $5,000 worth of silver, it would be this ginormous pile, this huge pile of silver. And yet, if he held his $5,000 in gold, that pile or that amount, that weight was 20 times less, 20 times smaller that he could carry around. So it's much more convenient, a more compact way of storing the wealth that he wasn't planning on trading. And in another sense, or in another way, he could also consider it as a method of trade or a medium of exchange for much larger purchases. If he needed to purchase, let's say, an estate or a house or something like that, it would be inconvenient to buy all of those big expensive things with a bunch of silver. Instead, he could trade for 20 times less in terms of quantity or weight. He could trade gold, and it was much more convenient for that other person on the other end of this exchange to accept the smaller quantity of gold that had that high value. And so this was his preservation of wealth, or his long-term storage of his wealth. And so these three things are very, very important in God's economy. And one final thought is, if we consider all of the things that the Bible talks about, all of the different topics, and as mentioned in this article, over 700 references to gold and silver in the Bible. Not only that it was historically a method of exchange or a store of value or God's version of money, but rather throughout history, it would be an enduring form of value or money that could exist. Now, unfortunately, today, there's a lot of restrictions that have been placed and a lot of knowledge, a lot of information that has been withheld or simply dissipated from the general public, that they have no idea how the economy really could have been if we had maintained biblical principles on the use of money and what it was. It's something that I'll be discussing more in future videos, but just some really serious food for thought. And of course, want to mention that right now, some very odd things are going on in the markets where the prices of gold and silver are actually declining temporarily. And there's a lot of reasons why that's happening. But in my opinion, anyone that is considering purchasing or investing in gold and silver, I'd be more than happy to give you some pointers, point you to some other research and things that I've studied, so that you can make an informed decision on whether you would like to invest in gold and silver. I'd be happy to discuss that. You can always message me here on Facebook. I also do have a website which I monitor. I get emails directly. You can subscribe or you can sign up. I have a website now called paradigmbible.org. You should be able to find a link in either in this page actually, or my Paradigm Bible Ministries page here on Facebook. But that's paradigmbible.org, PARADIMEBIBLE.org, paradigmbible.org. If you're looking for more information, like I said, you're welcome to reach out to me on Facebook Messenger or email, or like I said, take a look at that website. Lord willing, I'll be updating it a lot more in the near future and providing some other useful information. Thank you all, and God bless.